Our lives are a string of insights, flashes of inspiration that can be the catalyst for new ideas. However, our pace of life these days means we tend to miss some of them completely. I'm Dave Hill, and I'm the host of the Simple Reflections podcast, a fortnightly series of interviews with people from all walks of life. Our conversations are an invitation to reflect on some of the simple insights my guests have had that have gone on to have a profound impact on their lives. So grab a cuppa and a biscuit, join us, slow down for a little while and see what shows up for you. Well, welcome to the next episode of the Simple Reflections podcast. Today I'm joined by Dr Linda Pettit. Linda is a wonderful human being. I've known about her for a while. I've had the privilege of meeting her very briefly in London and a real privilege of working with her husband, Bill, who you've met on here before. Bill and Linda are based in Phoenix in Arizona, and Linda's got a really beautiful way of describing her profession. She's a professional listener, and that has a number of different elements to it. There's mentoring, there's speaking, there's being an author, there's also running her own podcast. So it's always lovely to have a fellow podcaster on here. But that's just a number of layers. There's also, she's a wife, she's a grandmother, she's a mother, and all of that delivered with huge amounts of love and compassion. And I'm just delighted that you could come on and join me today.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the lovely introduction. I like being called a wonderful human being.
Who doesn't? Who doesn't? But you certainly fit the bill.
Most of the time.
Well, yeah. We won't look in the dusty corners too much.
I don't mind looking in dusty corners. If you've read my book, you know that.
Well, your book, Leaning into Curves, is one of the reasons why I wanted to speak to you, because when I reached out a few months ago, I'd just received my copy of it. I hadn't read it at the time. I was excited to read it. And, you know, it does exactly what it says on the tin. You know, there are curves all over the place that take you in all kinds of different directions that I suppose I wasn't necessarily expecting, but equally was in that sense. It was a proper adventure in that sense of getting to understand a little bit about your life, about what's been important to you, and the sort of various pivotal moments in there. You know, before we hit record, before we sort of started this, you mentioned that the main driver behind that was to allow your grandchildren to understand who their grandfather was. Obviously, your original husband very sadly died. So I just, you know, how has that whole experience been for you in terms of wanting to leave a legacy from a family perspective, but in a very public way that opens it up to many, many other people?
Well, it's been interesting in so many different directions. The book deals to some degree with all kinds of topics: sexuality, a forbidden love, falling in love with a Roman Catholic priest, which was, not exactly blessed by the Catholic Church, which I was at that time, at age 24, very much immersed in. So I don't think the kids will actually read the book until they're adults, or older. And so there are copies tucked away for them. And, and various people who are in the book have had various thoughts about being in the book. One of the things about writing memoir is that you're writing your story, but it impinges on the stories of lots of other people who don't necessarily expect that they're going to ever show up in a book. And I did, to the best of my ability, send chapters to everyone who was mentioned in a significant way, who was like a central focus of a chapter. I did send them the material and said, how do you feel about this? And if there's anything that feels really inaccurate, knowing that nobody's ever going to look at a memory in exactly the same way, then I'll do my best to sort of bring it into better alignment. Surprisingly, almost all of the people who read it just gave me carte blanche to publish it as I had written it. There were a few minor changes, but there have been some reactions, primarily to my sharing about my sexuality and sexual experiences with my late husband and also with Bill. For some reason, that has been offensive to some people, and to some degree, it's I think a generational thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, older generations are much more private about that sort of thing. And I have just been thankful that I know what I know about the principles, to know that we all have separate realities, and that other people's reactions are, I'm going to use this word, they're harmless. You know, that I can be not disturbed by them. I can take them into consideration thoughtfully and feed that into my next book if it seems appropriate. But I can also know that I just did my very best to, from a place of love, share my truth. It was something that was important to me as I was writing. Am I telling the story through the eyes of love? Even the difficult bits of the story and my own difficult decisions in my life that caused me and other people pain. Am I telling that through the eyes of love and compassion? And I have peace about that.
I'm pleased to hear that, and you should. You know, it you know, the love just pours out of it. You know, and you don't sugarcoat things.
Yeah.
You know, I was speaking to someone on Friday who said there's a difference between being nice and being kind. You know, nice sugarcoats things, kind tells it how it is, but it's still all meant with love in that sense. And you know, it would be less of a book if you'd admitted those bits. You know, we are at a, you know, the world has been getting more and more open about things, and that's a good thing. And when things feel new and fresh for some, it can look raw and you know, uncomfortable. But that's only for the period that it's new and fresh, and they're not sure about it.
Yeah.
So I hope that you've created something that allows people to be more open in a way that they wish they could be and maybe feel they shouldn't.
I hope so. And I also will say that there were a few elements in my life, primarily in my childhood, that I left out of the book, in deference to a couple of people who I knew would be devastated. And you know, my thought about that, because I processed it with a number of people, was I didn't have any need to keep it secret. I didn't care that the world knew any part of the story. To me, there's a kind of beauty in all of it. But I kept asking myself, is this particular incident or this particular thing relevant to this particular storyline in the book, the through line in the book? And there were a couple of cases where I could say, no, you know, it really isn't. In the next book, yes, it probably will be there. But in this one, no. It's, you know, memoir is I think anyone who's ever written a memoir or will talk about how there's a lot that you grapple with on a lot of different levels. And I found I found out a lot about myself as I was writing it. The first two, the one of the first drafts, and then the very last draft, both Bill, my husband, and my story editor said to me, you know, you're really good, Linda, at describing what's going on with other people. You have an acute sense of that, and you write about it beautifully. But there are a number of stories here where I don't know where you are. You haven't written about yourself and what you were experiencing. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I went back and I thought, you know, that's really true. I was running kind of parallel to the river of my own experiencing. It wasn't that I was trying to hide anything. I just got aware that I had this tendency to just, you know, not not dip into my own truth, probably because of invisible thinking and conditioning that I had about myself. And so it was a real learning process, even up to the very last draft around loving who I am.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the sort of gentle topic leading us through today is the idea of about mastering transformative change. I know it's something that you talk about regularly, and it forms the essence of all the work that we're doing in whatever it is that we're doing anyway, from a coaching and a principles perspective. I wondered what you've noticed in this process of writing the book, going through it, that has been transformative for you in terms of how you now show up and do things, having been through it.
Right. I suppose that's an ever evolving thing. I think, although I will say that I moved through a lot of challenging circumstances in my life, even 20, 30, 40 years ago. As I look back, what I could see is my spiritual learning, my spiritual awakening, which came largely as a result of moving through those things, has made it easier and easier and easier. And to me, that was one of the reasons to write the book, was to collapse time for other people. To say, like Sid Banks, who talked about the principles, would often say, if you even brush up against this understanding and you begin to see it to some degree, knowing that there are infinite doors, then you will have jumped the boundaries of time, space, and matter. I always love that phrase. I was curious about it. And what I hear in it is time collapses. It doesn't have to take forever to move through transformative change. That as you see more and more about how the human experience works and how the human psychological experience and the spiritual experience are connected, then I think it just gets easier and gentler. And I just think, I just get amazed that some of the things that I'm finding for myself at 70, there are so many people who are coming to it at age 30 or age 35 or 25 or 15 or 7. It just seems like there's the awakening spiritual consciousness is affording a tremendous amount of wisdom of the ages and knowledge to people that can help them move through this life so much more gently than I did. And if this book makes a small contribution to that, and I know it has, people have told me that, then it's like, yeah, it is complete, and it has fulfilled itself. So, like, one of the things that I think is a more deeply understood thing for me today, even than it was 2 years ago, is that I'm going to use this phrase: everything is harmless. I think I got to that place with a lot of the things that I had gone through in my life. Oh, it unless I have thought about it, it doesn't exist. And so it has no potential to harm me. And also there is this source, a creator source that I have within me, that I am love in motion, that, like, to use the phrase that Bill and I use all the time, can never be broken, is never lacking. And the more continuously I am in contact with that knowing of who I am, the more I just see that all the things that happen in this world, in this life, have no capacity to harm me. Well, I didn't see that as deeply as I do right now when my late husband died, for example. So I went through a period of very deep suffering because I didn't see that. I'm not saying that was bad, because that precipitated my whole spiritual awakening.
Mm-hmm.
But I also see that seeing it more deeply has given me one of the keys to mastering transformative change, and made life a whole lot easier.
It's interesting, in an idealistic world, we wouldn't want anybody to suffer. But yet suffering is part of being a human being, not because it's designed or the system's cruel or whatever. It's just life happens. Things rub up in a way that we wish they wouldn't. But in that, there are so many options of how we take that going forwards. We can dwell on it, beat ourselves up about it, wish we hadn't done things, and sort of or catastrophize about what that might all mean unfolding in the future. Or we just chalk it up to that is something I've experienced. I wish I hadn't, but it is what it is. What can I learn from that? How can I step on from that? Albeit feeling a bit battered and bruised at the time. But that's not necessarily a given. I think having that understanding, seeing that the experience we have in the moment is being created by us, given our thinking in the moment, it almost takes away any capacity for feeling a victim of things, because we're absolutely allowed to feel sad and sore and in pain at times. But when we realise that that's just where we are in that moment, that's how we see it in that moment, and that will pass, it allows us to sort of fully appreciate, I suppose, everything that's available to us as human beings, rather than going, there's a portion of experience that we shouldn't have, we shouldn't experience, needs to be sidelined and avoided at all costs, rather than it's likely to crop up at some point, and that's okay. But
yeah. Sorry. Exactly. And as I was listening, what came to mind, no, nothing to be sorry about. What came to mind is it's kind of like I see more clearly now that in any given moment, no matter what's happening, I have a choice to either spiral, what I think of as spiraling up, or spiral down. It's a decision.
Mm-hmm.
And I have these incredible tools, on my understanding of mind, thought, and consciousness to either to utilize, to be in harmony with, to either spiral up or spiral down. And, I just don't want to spend as little of this precious life that I have in grief or suffering or pain or resentment or bitterness or regret or whatever. Just want to spend it in love and joy and peace and compassion and understanding. And that's a choice.
Yeah.
But I didn't, until I saw that I had the choice, I couldn't make a better decision. But as I began to see thought, really, as I began to see thought, it's like, oh, wow. I can, there's no judgment. There's no judgment anywhere. I can utilize thought to spiral down and have a really awful, negative, victim-y kind of experience of whatever this is, ranging from very small things to very big things, or I can use the power and gift of thought and consciousness and mind to spiral up and to have an enlightened perspective on something. Like you said, this is something I can learn from. This is something that is in my path to help me grow. This is something that invites me to love deeper. This is something that invites me to learn more about forgiveness or about non-judgment. And then my experience of it is going to be really different.
Mm.
It's going to be very peaceful.
You've mentioned that you came across this understanding, um, later in life, as it were, still a good number of years ago. But that wasn't to say that you weren't a hugely effective, loving, giving person up until that point. I wonder how this all felt for you as you were going from I'm on rails, this is my career, this is how I look at things, this is the way I see things, to, oh my word, basically there's something that's just come in left of field and completely knocked that understanding of this is how it works, this is how I serve people, to wait a minute, there's a whole new layer here that I wasn't anticipating. I wonder, what that felt like at the time, if you can recall, and how that settled over time.
Well, that's a great question. And it's there are probably some insights that came that have helped me over time to answer that. When it happened, it was when as I've been functioning as a traditional psychologist doing primarily cognitive therapy and Jungian-based therapy for 20 years, when I found the principles through my husband Bill and met Sydney Banks. And initially it wasn't an easy transition. It felt a bit to me like I was being asked to give up everything I'd learned in psychology. But over time, and there are people in the three principles world who will disagree with this, over time I saw, no, it wasn't asking me to give up everything. I had an insight probably 10 years ago one day that, oh my gosh, it wasn't that the principles started operating the minute someone named them for me. They had been operating perfectly from the time I took my first breath. And they were guiding me. And they guided me to psychology. And they guided me to all the understandings that I learned. And as I looked back at those understandings, because I'm a counselor, I'd been a counselor educator. So even though I was deeply moved by the principles and sharing them in my practice with people, I was also teaching traditional psychology. And as I looked at all of the traditional theories that I was teaching, I could see the principles in perfect operation in all of them. Yes, there were misunderstandings, but there was also truth. There were people who were touching truth and then trying to use their intellects to describe how to share how to share the truth with others. And sometimes it would get clouded. It always gets clouded when you try to put it into form, put it into language. But I could see the beauty in all of it, and I could love the beauty in all of it. And when I really had that insight, it didn't seem like such a, well, I was on this track and then I moved on to that track. It was more like, oh, the track just got bigger and wider and more clear and more focused and more aligned with the wisdom of the ages. And I think the big thing for me, one of the big things was that I'd always been looking for a way to share the spiritual in psychotherapy, because I had seen on my own that people who came in with what they called psychological problems were actually experiencing spiritual distress. That came before the principles. And I was really curious about that. There's something here about not seeing their connection to an infinite loving power that is causing this suffering. But there were no theories in psychology that really allowed me to bring that forward. And in fact, I'd been trained, you don't bring the spiritual and the religious into psychotherapy. Well, that's changed now, but this was 25 years ago. And so I had found Carl Jung, who was very spiritual, and that became a way that I could bring the spiritual into psychotherapy. Well, when I found the principles, it was like, oh, wow, this is it. This is the link, the missing link, as Sydney Banks called it, between the psychological and the spiritual. This is the way to talk about the spiritual with everyone that transcends all forms. It transcends all religions. And as I began to just live into that, I saw that, like, oh, it doesn't matter if my client is Jewish or Muslim or Hindu or Baha'i, or I can talk about the creator spirit using the lens of these three principles with everyone, and they all get it in their own lexicon or language. And that was a really beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Really beautiful thing. So it didn't feel like, although initially it did feel like, oh my gosh, I'm being asked to switch tracks. The more I lived into it and was guided intuitively through it, the more I saw, no, I'm not. This is just the next, it's the next evolution. It's the next level of consciousness. It's the next level of awareness. And it seemed very continuous to me, and that was very beautiful.
No, that rings true on many levels for me as well, I think. I've got teenage daughters at the moment who are learning things at different stages because of where they are through the school journey. And there are things that they've learnt that make sense to them and they're comfortable with. And then the teacher adds another layer onto that and they go, oh, you've just broken it. What they knew is still true, but there's now another way of looking at, let's see how this all interplays, and that there's neither right nor wrong in either of these things. They're just two ways of getting somewhere. And, I'm using two ways in this instance. There's probably many more than that with the subjects that they're looking at, but it just opens their mind up to, it's not just one route to the answer here. There's plenty of others to go and explore. And actually, the more broadly you look at something, the more you'll see, the more curious you get, the more options there are, and the more you relax into the fact that we don't know everything, and nor are we supposed to. But that's okay. We've got enough, absolutely got enough in any given moment to deal with whatever's right in front of us. And there's a real freedom in the lack of control, in a sense, in that way, which is worrying for some, I think, certainly to start with.
Yeah. I have a good analogy. I saw something with my grandchildren recently, that little Luke, who's now 7, went, he was a pandemic baby during the whole pandemic. He was a toddler. So I and my daughter had another infant during that time period. So I spent a lot of time with Luke. And when Luke was here, he loved trains. He loved Thomas the train. And so we had wooden train tracks and all kinds of Thomas trains. And I spent hours on the floor with Luke building train tracks and moving little Thomas trains around the train tracks. Well, Dave, there came a day a couple of years ago where Luke just put away his trains because the world of reading had opened to him. And now he could read about trains and he could really understand how trains work. It wasn't that he looked back on the train time and said, well, that was stupid. That wasn't a good thing for me to be doing. In fact, he learned a lot about how things fit together and about imagination and about playing cooperatively with Grammy. Learned so much from that. But there came a point where no one had to tell him, put away your trains now and read books. The intelligence behind life was just moving him in the next direction of his growth and his evolution and into a new layer of the bigness of the world that's available to him and open to him. Well, that's kind of how I look at what I experienced with regard to the principles, that it wasn't that anything that came before that was not valuable. I learned a lot from it, and it was
Mm.
perfect for me. And then there just came a point through some grace that the universe said, okay, we're going to show you something new. We're going to show you this understanding called the threat principles, and we're going to show you how they actually are the paintbrush that you use for creating the life you're experiencing. And guess what? You create everything. Whoa.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was off on something new without any judgment of what had come before.
Yeah. It's, yeah, I'm sitting here with sore cheeks because I've been smiling so much. Because I recognize it so much in how things have unfolded for me over the last 8 years of exploring this, and knowing the more I explore, the less I realize I know, and that's exciting. Let's see where that ends up. But equally, how that's just part of being a human being. It's been happening forever for everyone since the dawn of time. It's just we're now getting different language to help try and articulate it in a way that hopefully is less scary, and allows people to be truly themselves. That they don't, there isn't anything about special people with special powers.
Yeah.
This is human beings being superhuman because they all are, and sort of linking into that and seeing that dawn for people as you're having conversations with them, and hopefully opening a door for them and their world where they go, oh wow, okay, we've got an infinite set of colors here, an infinite palette, an infinite canvas. Right, let's go play. Let's see what we can do here. Rather than, oh no, I need to keep all of this really tight, really, really close because I've got a handle on this, and everything else outside it looks scary and disastrous, and I'm bound to make a mistake. When the light comes on for people, it's a beautiful thing to see, and it's a lovely thing to just go, what's just happened there, please? Please, can you explain what you've seen? Because I've seen a shift in you that I think you're excited about and you haven't got words for. So let's try and put some around it.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, it's cool.
But
It's really,
it was fun to watch your face. I mean, just the joy that you mirrored as you were talking about that experience of seeing something new, something that makes life gentler and easier and frees you to live more playfully and
yeah,
and joyfully. Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. And I don't know about you, but it just seems to me like it's happening for a lot of people,
yeah,
and it's happening faster. As I look, because I'm 70, I've been in the helping professions for over 40 years, and the openness and the speed and the rapidity I'm seeing now with how many people are just waking up is it's pretty astonishing.
mm.
Glad I'm here to witness it.
Yeah. Ditto. For me, it looks like dominoes. Like I remember watching in awe as a child of these people setting up, record-breaking domino races that would just go off and write words and create pictures, but thousands of these things going off all over the place. And this is just like that. There is nothing clever in it. It's showing up with love and warmth and compassion and kindness with another human being, for them to then catch on to something in that exchange, whether there's been a description of how that might be helpful, or them just realizing it for themselves. They don't need to have any language around it. And then going off in the world, being themselves, sharing in the same way with their family and friends. And I'm not surprised that we're seeing it as a faster rate, because there are more people pushing over more dominoes. And it's just running and running and running. And yeah, let's see where that takes us.
recently come across a couple of writings, doesn't really matter where they came from, but both pointing in the direction of a number of prophecies coming out of indigenous cultures and other cultures, talking about when we crossed into the age of Aquarius, there would be a massive shift in consciousness. And the shift would be from looking outside ourselves for God, going through a technological age and realizing that the answers can't be found in the intellect and technology, and looking for a power greater than ourselves outside of ourselves. And then in the age of Aquarius, shifting to an understanding of beingness, that we are the beingness of God in this world. We are the divine spark in this world. We're not separate from it. There is no duality. We are that beautiful mind in motion, what I like to call love in motion. And it's that's what I think people are waking up to.
Mm-hmm.
Whoa.
Yeah. It's cool.
I'm not separate. And what are the implications for that?
Yeah. Absolutely.
I'm a creator.
Yeah. No, it's cool to see that. It's really exciting to see other people talking about it without actually it being introduced. There's a good friend of mine who I served with in the army. I won't mention him at all by name or give anything away, but he will know exactly who it is that I'm talking about. He, before we even started exploring this to try and help him through a really torrid time of post-traumatic stress and bits and pieces, he knew that we were all connected. He had felt a connection with other people across the globe. He'd wake up and go, I'm worried about so-and-so, and pick the phone up and they would be struggling somewhere. And he would just go, well, that's just who I am. I said, yeah, it is exactly who you are. And you're right, we are all connected. And it's fascinating to see people become more comfortable with that, because they probably already know it. And they just go, well, that's a bit weird. I can't share that with anybody. They just think I'm a bit of a loony. It's human connection is all it is, and it's beautiful.
Well, and the other thing that comes to mind is whenever I would talk about intuitive knowing, being guided by love, I would wonder, because I could see that intuitive knowing was more present if I was quieter, if I was in a good feeling, if I was feeling grateful, if I was peaceful, was listening intentionally to the stillness within. But I also would think, well, but when I was in my darkest moments, and I could name a number of them, intuitive knowing, synchronicity got very strong. What is it about difficulty that seems to thin the veil between the psychological and the spiritual? And it came to me very recently. Oh my gosh, it was right there in front of my face. It was humility. That in those moments, like your friend having experienced the difficulties of war, and we ask so many questions about what's the meaning of life in the face of this kind of thing, and why is this happening, and how do I cope, and where do I go? In those moments when we know we don't know, we experience humility, and in that humility, it is another access point. It is a doorway for intuitive knowing to just come wide in. Because most of us at some level in those moments of humility ask for help. I can think of a dozen times when I was in really dark times when I was on my knees saying, please help me. I don't know how to get through this. I'm not even sure I was super clear about who I was asking at that point.
Yeah.
Just something.
Yeah.
And then something would come.
It's almost to the point that we give up on needing to be in control ourselves and have the answer, and
Yeah.
then that slows this down a little bit. It slows the old brain down a little bit, enough for something else to bubble up, and for us to see it in a way that went, there we go. Let's follow that. Let's see where that takes us.
And Sydney Banks and a number of other spiritual teachers have talked about how they had enlightenment experiences that I have not had, but have talked about how the mind of God, the power of love, the wisdom of the ages, whatever you want to call it, will never override our free will. And there are a number of teachers who've talked about that. A number of people who've had near-death experiences have come back and said, yeah, that's one thing I learned. This power will never override our free will. Well, in those moments where we get on our knees or we are humbled and we say, my intellect doesn't have anything in its data banks about how to handle this. It's like artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence can only utilize what has been put into it. It is not capable of fresh, original thinking. And in a way, our brains are not capable of fresh, original thinking. They can only go with whatever has been programmed into it. But when we get on our knees and we say, metaphorically, I don't know what to do here. Help. Then the help comes. It's not that it hasn't always been there. It's always been all around us. But it has permission. And then it drops in. It drops in simple ways. Call your friend. Reach out to so-and-so. Read this book. Consider this. Consider that. And when we follow those things, that intuition from within, teaching from within, from the still small voice, it isn't necessarily that some big grand thing happens, but some in the moment we get through whatever is in front of us with more grace.
Yeah. Well, Linda, that's been beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I wonder, you mentioned you have another book in the offing. I was just wondering if there's any projects or things that you've got going on at the moment that you'd like to share with us that people can look out for, and I could put links to in the blurb.
Well, the big thing that I am working on right now is the second book, which is tentatively titled Beautiful Magic: How Love Spins Gold from Straw. And it's really there's something developing in the psychology world right now called post-traumatic growth. And it's an understanding that is taking psychology, more than anything I've seen to this point, to the edge of spirituality, and saying, how is it that so many people actually do grow beyond a baseline? It's not just they return to a baseline post-trauma, but as they heal, they go beyond where they were before. And it's fascinating as I'm reading and learning about what's being said about post-traumatic growth, that a lot of the people who are talking about it are almost talking about it apologetically. They're saying, oh, we want to talk about this thing called post-traumatic growth, but don't hear this as a judgment of your suffering. Like somehow it's tricky to talk about growth from trauma because it somehow negates the suffering of trauma. It's fascinating to me, and yet the interesting reality is that if you look at all the trauma data, only about 10 to 15% of people develop post-traumatic stress disorder. Most of us are pretty resilient through trauma. Now, that's not a judgment of those who get stuck. It's, what do we learn? What can we learn to help everyone through this? And help even those who maybe return to a baseline go beyond that, really and fully, spiritually wake up to their incredible power as creators. And so this second book is really an attempt to kind of look at that, how how most of us just don't even look at the stories in our lives and see the times when we did transcend suffering and grow bigger as human beings, widen as human beings. We just, in a way, our attention is just pointed in the wrong direction. And when we look at it, when I look at my life and when I help people look at their lives, there's brilliant, unnoticed magic that has been going on that most of us haven't paid any attention to.
Mm-hmm.
And that has to be true if God is true.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. Thank you so much. And good luck with finishing it off.
Thank you. Hope to have it up by the end of the year.
Amazing. Just in time for Christmas.
Yes.
Perfect.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about it. I'm really excited.
You're very welcome, and thank you very much for coming along and sharing it.
Oh, thank you.
Take care.
Take care.
Thank you for joining us today. If you've enjoyed the conversation, feel free to subscribe and join me and my new guest next time. If you're interested in the work I'm doing, or you think I can be of service to you or your organisation, please email dave@simplicityofmind.co.uk. Remember, see if you can find time to slow down and reflect. Those simple ideas might be worth listening to. Take care, and I hope you can join me in a couple of weeks.